Alex Carter stood in front of the towering, reflective building of Zervik Industries, feeling like a small dot in the vast cosmos. He had imagined what this moment would feel like his first day at one of the most prestigious interstellar companies in the galaxy. Zervik Industries was known for being the bridge between Earth and countless alien civilizations, pioneering technological advancements and interspecies diplomacy. Landing a job here was a dream come true for a guy who'd grown up in a small town with his eyes glued to the stars. Alex adjusted his tie nervously. Even the building looked otherworldly, with its glassy, fluid architecture that shimmered in the sunlight. Humans and aliens alike moved seamlessly in and out of its revolving doors, their clothes sleek and futuristic, reflecting the company's cutting-edge reputation. It felt surreal, standing here as a part of it. "All right, Carter. Don't mess this up," he muttered to himself, taking a deep breath before stepping into the entrance. As soon as he walked inside, the vast open space made him feel even smaller. The ceiling stretched so high it seemed to blend into the sky, and floating information pods zipped by, offering directions to employees. The walls glowed faintly, alive with shifting colors and subtle alien inscriptions, making the building feel almost organic. "First day?" A friendly voice caught Alex's attention. He turned to see a woman about his age with a warm smile on her face. She was human, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a badge that read Susan Hollis, Earth Department. "Yeah, I'm Alex Carter. Just got transferred from the Mars sector," he said, returning the smile, trying to shake off his nerves. "Ah, you're the new guy from the interspecies program. Welcome," Susan said enthusiastically. "Don't worry, you'll fit in just fine. It's a bit of an adjustment at first, but everyone here's used to working with different species. You'll pick up on the office quirks in no time." "Quirks?" Alex wondered. He wasn't even sure what quirks meant in a place like this. Before he could ask, Susan pointed toward the far end of the lobby, where a group of people both human and alien were standing by a large glass elevator. "That's the Earth Department. Our floor's up there. Oh, and by the way," she added in a low voice, "you'll probably meet Zelina Vorik today." Alex's stomach tightened. Zelina Vorik, the CEO of Zervik Industries, was not just any executive. She was a Xyloran, one of the most enigmatic and powerful alien species in the galaxy. Her reputation preceded her, brilliant, decisive, and nearly impossible to read. Alex had read up on the Xylorans during his training. Tall, slender beings with iridescent skin that shimmered like molten silver, and their eyes, large and crystalline, were said to pierce through the surface of any emotion. They weren't known for their warmth. Susan caught the look on Alex's face and chuckled. "Yeah, everyone's a little intimidated by her at first. Don't worry, she doesn't bite." "Great," Alex said, managing a half-hearted smile. "Good to know." They entered the elevator, which hummed softly as it ascended the building. The view outside was breathtaking, giving Alex a sweeping panorama of the city below, a fusion of Earth and alien architecture. He couldn't believe he was actually here. As the elevator doors slid open, Alex stepped into the Earth Department's workspace. Unlike the bustling lobby below, the floor had an eerie stillness to it. Floating desks were arranged in a circular formation, and screens projected holographic reports in midair. The atmosphere was efficient, calm, and distinctly corporate. At the center of the room stood Zelina Vorik. Seeing her in person for the first time, Alex understood why she commanded such presence. Zelina was easily over 7 feet tall, her sleek, shimmering silver skin radiating an ethereal glow under the office lights. Her clothes, tailored to perfection, were a mix of flowing fabric and intricate alien designs that reflected the advanced culture she hailed from. But it was her eyes that truly stood out, large, crystalline orbs that seemed to absorb everything in their gaze. She was speaking in rapid, clipped Xyloran to one of the alien executives, her tone as cold and precise as the architecture around her. And then, without warning, she turned and locked eyes with Alex. His heart skipped a beat. It felt as if the room had suddenly shrunk, with Zelena's presence magnified 1,000 times over. Even though she was several feet away, the weight of her attention hit him like a force field. Susan nudged him, whispering, "Breathe, Carter." Zelena's gaze shifted momentarily, as if she had sensed something in him. Then, in a voice that was both smooth and powerful, she addressed him directly. "Alex Carter," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "Welcome to Zervik Industries." Alex nodded, unable to find his voice. There was something unnerving about the way she said his name, like she was testing it, tasting the sound on her alien tongue. Zelena took a step closer, her eyes studying him in a way that made his skin prickle. "I understand you've come through the Mars Division's Interspecies program. You'll find things are different here." Her choice of words hung in the air like a warning. "Thank you, ma'am," Alex finally managed to say, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. Zelena didn't smile. She rarely did, according to the whispers he'd heard. "We'll see how well you adapt. Humans are interesting in that way." With a final, lingering glance, she turned back to her work, her shimmering form blending into the room's futuristic backdrop. Alex exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. His nerves were shot, but a small part of him couldn't help feeling exhilarated. There was something about her presence that left a mark both intimidating and, strangely, magnetic. Susan gave him a knowing look. "You survived your first encounter with the boss. That's a win in my book." "She's intense," Alex muttered, still trying to shake the feeling that Zelena had seen right through him. "That's one way to put it." Susan chuckled. "But you'll get used to it." "Well, sort of. Everyone here is kind of on edge around her. She's brilliant, no doubt, but the Xylorans are different. Especially her." "What do you mean?" Alex asked, curiosity piqued. Before Susan could answer, a sharp ping echoed through the office, a holographic notification announcing the start of a meeting. Susan sighed. "Guess you'll have to find out for yourself. Welcome to Zervik Industries, Alex. The ride's just beginning." As Alex settled into his new desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that this job was going to be much more than he bargained for. Working under Zelena Vorik was sure to be a challenge, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite understand, was already stirring in the air. And it wasn't just nerves. It was something much, much more. By the time Alex hit his second week at Zervik Industries, he had started to adjust to the whirlwind pace of working for an interstellar company. He was getting familiar with the advanced tech, the strange alien coworkers, and even the occasional odd customs that came with interspecies collaboration. But despite his best efforts to blend in, something had started to feel off. It wasn't just the pressure of meeting Zelena Vorik's impossibly high expectations. It was something else entirely, something in the air. The first sign had been subtle. It started as a faint scent lingering in the office, like the soft aroma of exotic fruit mixed with a floral perfume that he couldn't quite place. At first, Alex thought it was just a new air filter system, or maybe one of the alien species in the department emitted natural scents. But then, the scent started to change, becoming stronger, more noticeable. It seemed to follow him wherever he went, intensifying whenever Zelena entered the room. "Does it smell weird in here, or is it just me?" Susan asked one morning as they sat in the break room. She wrinkled her nose, looking around as if the answer might be floating in the air. Alex, who had been stirring his coffee absently, nodded. "Yeah, I've noticed it too. It's like, sweet, but not in a normal way." Susan raised an eyebrow. "It's definitely not the new air filters. I checked." She glanced toward the hallway where Zelena had just passed by, her shimmering form briefly visible through the glass. "You don't think?" "Think what?" Alex asked, though he had a sinking suspicion he knew where she was headed. "Well, Xylorans are pretty private about their biological stuff. But I've read in some forums that they have pheromones." especially during their mating period. Alex nearly choked on his coffee. They're what? You heard me, Susan whispered conspiratorially, leaning in closer. Mating period. It happens like once every 12 years or something. And if the rumors are true, it's not something they broadcast openly. But the pheromones? They mess with people, especially humans. Alex blinked, his mind racing. Mating period? That explained the strange scent that had been getting stronger, but it didn't explain why he suddenly felt more distracted whenever Zelina was around. His heart would race, and his thoughts would get fuzzy. He tried to keep things professional, but it was becoming harder to focus on his work when she was nearby. Are you sure? Alex asked, trying to keep his voice low. He glanced around the room, half expecting one of the alien workers to overhear their conversation. I mean, she's our boss. There's no way something like that could affect us, right? Susan shrugged, her eyes darting towards Zelina's office. I don't know. But I can tell you this, it's not just you and me. A few of the others have mentioned feeling weird too. Like they're drawn to her. As if on cue, the door to the break room slid open, and Zelina stepped inside. The room seemed to shift as she entered, the air becoming charged with something indescribable. Her iridescent skin shimmered more brightly than usual, casting soft glints of light around the room. Alex felt his pulse quicken. Carter, she said, her voice smooth but carrying an undertone that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. I need you to go over the quarterly reports and prepare them for tomorrow's meeting. Alex nodded quickly, standing up so fast that he nearly knocked over his coffee. Of course, ma'am. I'll get on it right away. Zelina's crystalline eyes lingered on him for just a second too long. He felt the intensity of her gaze wash over him like a wave, making his head spin slightly. As she turned to leave, the faint scent of that sweet, exotic fragrance grew stronger, enveloping the room in its invisible grip. Once she was gone, Alex sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. See what I mean? Susan whispered, her eyes wide. I'm telling you, it's pheromones. The office chaos begins over the next few days. The situation in the office started to deteriorate. It wasn't just Alex and Susan who were noticing the change, everyone was feeling it. Conversations were becoming shorter, more disjointed. Meetings that usually ran like clockwork were now filled with awkward silences and sidelong glances. People seemed unfocused, jittery, and agitated. And all of it seemed to center around Zelina. The glowing skin, the intense eye contact, the palpable shift in the air whenever she entered a room, it was all connected to her. And the worst part? No one knew how to handle it. One morning, during a crucial meeting with a group of clients from an alien race Alex couldn't even pronounce, Zelina's pheromones seemed to hit their peak. Alex sat at the conference table, trying desperately to stay focused on the presentation. But it was nearly impossible. His thoughts were cloudy, and his body felt tense, like he was teetering on the edge of some unseen precipice. Across the table, Susan fidgeted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between the clients and Zelina. Several of the human employees were struggling to stay composed, shifting in their seats and avoiding direct eye contact. Even the aliens in the room seemed affected, their usually stoic expressions betraying signs of agitation. Zelina, however, seemed completely in control, as though she was unaware or maybe indifferent to the chaos her presence was causing. Carter, she said, snapping him out of his daze. Can you provide the projected sales growth for the next quarter? Alex blinked, trying to shake off the fog in his mind. Yes, ma'am, he stammered, fumbling with his data tablet. His hands felt shaky as he pulled up the numbers, the screen flickering in his vision. As he recited the data, he could feel Zelina's eyes on him, her gaze like a spotlight that made it impossible to concentrate. By the time the meeting was over, Alex's head was pounding, and his nerves were shot. That was rough, Susan muttered as they exited the conference room. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I know, Alex agreed, feeling the weight of the past few days press down on him. It's like she's Dash. Before he could finish, a voice from behind interrupted them. Carter, Hollis. My office. Now. It was Zelina, standing in the hallway with that same unnerving intensity in her crystalline eyes. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He exchanged a quick glance with Susan, who looked equally nervous, and they both followed Zelina toward her sleek, silver office. As the door closed behind them, the air in the room felt warmer, more charged. The scent stronger now wrapped around Alex like a blanket, making it hard to think straight. Zelina stood behind her floating desk, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence in the room was deafening. I'm sure you've noticed, she began, her voice cool and measured, that there have been disruptions in the office. Alex swallowed hard, not trusting himself to speak. His pulse quickened as Zelina's eyes flicked between him and Susan. This is not uncommon for my species, she continued, her gaze piercing. What you are experiencing is a result of my biology. Xylorans, as you may have learned, enter a mating period. During this time, we emit pheromones that can affect those around us. Unfortunately, the effect is stronger on humans than I anticipated. Susan shifted uncomfortably, her eyes wide. Stronger? Zelina nodded, her expression still composed. The pheromones are intended to attract mates within our own species, but it seems that they also interfere with the emotional and psychological responses of other species, particularly humans. I apologize for any discomfort this may have caused. Discomfort? Alex thought. That was putting it mildly. Zelina's eyes locked onto Alex, her expression unreadable. You will need to be particularly mindful, Carter. The effects seem to be heightened around you. Alex felt his face flush. He couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or something else entirely. This phase will pass, Zelina said calmly, as though this were just another ordinary business matter. In the meantime, you must remain focused. I expect nothing less than professionalism from both of you. With that, she turned back to her desk, the conversation clearly over. Alex and Susan exchanged another glance, then quickly excused themselves from the office. As they stepped into the hallway, the door sliding shut behind them, Susan let out a long breath. Well, she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. This is going to be a nightmare. Alex couldn't agree more. Zelina's mating period was just beginning, and already, it was driving everyone in the office to the brink of madness. The atmosphere in the office had descended into chaos. What had once been a highly efficient, professional environment was now a mess of confusion, awkwardness, and unspoken tension. Zelina's pheromones had escalated to the point where they were almost palpable. The faint, sweet scent that once drifted through the air had become overwhelming, clinging to the walls like a humid fog. Alex could feel it pressing on his senses the moment he stepped through the door each morning. It was driving him and everyone else crazy. By now, the human staff was barely functioning. Meetings that used to run with military precision were derailing into scattered conversations, filled with sidelong glances and shifting bodies. People avoided eye contact, their faces flushed, and some even opted to work remotely to escape the pheromonal influence that seemed to hover over the office like a storm cloud. Worse, it wasn't just the humans feeling the effects anymore. Some of the alien employees, those from species with closer biological similarities to the Xylorans, were beginning to exhibit signs of distraction as well. The whole department felt on edge, like a tightly coiled spring ready to snap. Dude, I swear I can't concentrate, one of the engineers, Tom, whispered to Alex one morning. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. Every time she walks by, it's like my brain short-circuits. I've never felt anything like this. Is this normal for Xylorans? No, Alex muttered, trying to focus on the spreadsheet in front of him. But even as he spoke, he wasn't entirely sure. The data blurred on his screen, and his thoughts kept drifting to Zelina, her towering figure, the mesmerizing shimmer of her skin, and those piercing eyes that seemed to haunt his every waking moment. I mean, I've heard about this sort of thing in textbooks, Tom continued, rubbing his temples. But experiencing it firsthand? It's insane. How does HR not have a plan for this? Alex had no answers. It wasn't like they covered dealing with alien pheromones in the onboarding manual. Across the office, Susan was having a conversation with two other coworkers, her voice low but filled with urgency. Alex caught snatches of the conversation as he passed by to grab another cup of coffee, his third of the day. HR sent out an internal memo, she was saying, but it was vague. Just told us to stay professional and avoid unnecessary contact with Zelina for the next few weeks. But how are we supposed to do that when she's everywhere? Alex groaned inwardly. He had seen the memo too. It was like a corporate band-aid on a gaping wound. It offered no real solutions, no coping mechanisms. Instead, it was filled with corporate jargon like maintain distance and stay focused on your work, as if that were possible when Zelina's very presence sent waves of heat through the office. And now, to make things worse, they had a critical company presentation coming up, a meeting with interstellar clients from the Calziac Federation, one of the most important partners Zervik Industries had. Zelina was supposed to lead the presentation, and all eyes would be on her and, by extension, her pheromones. Alex had no idea how they were going to pull it off. The Calziac Federation meeting the day of the presentation arrived, and the office was in full panic mode. The Calziacs were a high-ranking species, known for their cold precision and business acumen. The stakes were higher than ever, and with the office barely functioning under the strain of Zelina's phenomenal influence, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The entire Earth Department had been gathered in the sleek conference room, waiting for the clients to arrive. The air was buzzing with nervous energy, and the subtle, fruity sweet scent of Zelina's pheromones was stronger than ever. Everyone was fidgeting in their seats, stealing glances at the door, their nerves clearly frayed. Alex sat at the head of the table next to Susan, his palms sweating as he scanned the agenda on his data tablet. Every time Zelina spoke, his focus would waver, his attention pulled to her like a gravitational force. She was standing at the front of the room, her shimmering form perfectly still, eyes scanning over the team with cold, calculating precision. Except something was wrong. Zelina, usually composed and unwavering, was also visibly off. Her skin glowed brighter than ever, the iridescent hues shifting rapidly, almost flickering. She wasn't pacing or moving, as if trying to maintain control, but Alex could sense her tension. Her pheromones had reached a peak so much so that the scent was now almost dizzying. "They're here," Susan whispered, nudging Alex as the double doors slid open. The Calziacs entered with their usual poise, tall, lanky figures draped in flowing, metallic robes. Their skin had a metallic sheen to it, a feature of their species, and their expressionless faces betrayed no emotion. They took their seats around the table, their sharp, analytical eyes scanning the room. Zelina stood at the front, her back straight, face perfectly composed. She began the presentation, speaking in flawless galactic standard, her voice smooth and steady despite the undercurrent of tension running through the room. Her words were sharp and persuasive, outlining Zervik Industries' latest technological advancements and the benefits of continued partnership with the Calziacs. But as the presentation went on, Alex noticed something troubling. Zelina's glow had become even more intense, her iridescent skin pulsing in a way that seemed unnatural. The pheromones in the room were almost unbearable now, pressing down on him like a thick fog. Alex's pulse raced, and he struggled to stay focused, his mind buzzing with static. And then, it happened. In the middle of a sentence, Zelina faltered. Her voice, always so sharp and commanding, wavered ever so slightly. It was almost imperceptible, but Alex caught it. So did the Calziacs. One of them, a tall figure with piercing blue eyes, raised an eyebrow. "Is there something amiss, Ms. Vorik?" he asked, his voice smooth and cool, but with an edge of suspicion. Zelina straightened, her eyes narrowing. No, she said firmly. There is no issue. We dash. But before she could finish, the glow around her skin brightened to an almost blinding intensity, and the scent of her pheromones surged through the room like a wave. Alex felt his entire body tense, his thoughts spiraling. His skin tingled, and his mind felt foggy, as though he was being pulled into a haze. His breath caught in his throat, and he could hear several others in the room shifting uncomfortably, murmuring to each other in hushed tones. The Kalziaks were growing visibly agitated, their once stoic faces showing signs of discomfort. The lead representative, the one who had spoken earlier, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at Zelina. Ms. Vorik, he said, his tone now sharp, if there is a biological complication, we expect transparency. We are here for business, not distractions. Zelina's eyes flicked toward Alex briefly, but it was enough for him to see the panic beneath her usual calm exterior. She was losing control. In that moment, Alex knew he had to act. Excuse me, gentlemen, Alex interrupted, standing up from his seat. His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to speak. There's been a minor environmental fluctuation in the room's climate control systems. I'll adjust it immediately. The Kalziaks gave him a curious look, but they didn't object. Alex quickly tapped a few commands into his data tablet, sending a signal to dim the lights slightly and increase the ventilation in the room, hoping to dilute the intensity of Zelina's pheromones. He could only hope it would be enough to buy her some time. Zelina, regaining her composure, took a deep breath and continued the presentation. But Alex could see the strain in her movements, the tension in her voice. She was fighting a battle on two fronts, maintaining her professional facade while battling her own biology. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, with Alex barely able to keep his thoughts straight. When the Kalziaks finally stood to leave, their expressions were still cool and unreadable, but there was an unmistakable air of discomfort about them. As soon as the doors closed behind the clients, the room erupted into a collective exhale. That was something, Susan muttered, rubbing her temples. She looked over at Alex, her face pale. You think they bought the climate control excuse? I hope so, Alex replied, feeling drained. His head was still spinning, his body tense from the pheromonal onslaught. But I don't know how much longer this can go on. The aftermath. Later that evening, after the office had mostly cleared out, Alex found himself in his cubicle, trying to finish up some reports. The buzz of the office had died down, and for the first time in days, there was some semblance of calm. But just as he was about to call it a day, a notification popped up on his screen, message from Zelina Vorik. His stomach tightened as he opened the message. Carter, it read, meet me in my office. Alex hesitated, his mind racing. What now? With a deep breath, he stood and made his way to Zelina's office. The door slid open as he approached, and inside, Zelina stood by her desk, her back to him as she looked out over the city skyline. The room was dimly lit, and the scent of pheromones, though still present, had lessened somewhat. You wanted to see me? Alex asked, his voice steady but cautious. Zelina turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Her iridescent skin had dimmed slightly, and her eyes, though still sharp, seemed tired. You handled the situation well today, she said quietly. The Kalziaks were less than pleased, but you managed to defuse the situation. Alex nodded, unsure of what to say. Zelina stepped closer, her towering figure casting a long shadow across the room. I underestimated the effect my pheromones would have on this office. On you. Her crystalline eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Alex felt that same magnetic pull, the same intoxicating force that had been clouding his mind for days. But this time, there was something else in her gaze. Something more personal. I will regain control, Carter, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. But until then, I need you to stay focused. Alex swallowed hard, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I will, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Something deeper than just the effects of her pheromones. And as he walked out of her office, the scent still lingering in the air, he knew one thing for certain. The office felt like a pressure cooker. Days had passed since the disastrous meeting with the Kalziaks, and although Alex had managed to defuse the situation, the atmosphere in the Earth Department was more strained than ever. Zelina's pheromones continued to wreak havoc, and despite her efforts to maintain control, it was clear she was struggling. Employees were barely able to focus on their work, productivity had dropped to an all-time low, and the unspoken tension between Zelina and Alex had reached an unbearable level. Alex found himself waking up each morning with a growing sense of dread. He had hoped Zelina's mating period would have started to taper off by now, but it seemed to be intensifying instead. Every day, the air felt thicker, more charged with an electric, biological force that he couldn't escape. Even the pheromone suppressant sprays HR had provided barely made a dent anymore. And then came the breaking point. A collapse in control that started like any other day. The office was quiet as Alex arrived, the usual hum of activity dulled by the now familiar sense of discomfort. He made his way to his desk, mentally preparing himself for another day of fighting through the haze of pheromones and trying to focus on his work. Susan had taken a sick day, though Alex suspected it was more of a mental health break, like many of their colleagues had been taking recently. Alex settled into his chair and pulled up the day's tasks on his screen, but before he could even begin, a notification popped up, emergency meeting in the main conference room. All employees required. His heart sank. Not another meeting. With a sigh, he grabbed his tablet and made his way to the conference room, where the rest of the department had already started to gather. Everyone looked as worn down as he felt, eyes glassy, postures slouched. Even the alien workers seemed off, their usual efficiency dulled by the oppressive atmosphere. Zelina was already at the front of the room, standing tall but with an unmistakable tension in her body. Her iridescent skin was glowing more brightly than Alex had ever seen, pulsing gently with each breath she took. Her expression was unreadable, but Alex could sense something simmering beneath the surface, something dangerous. She began the meeting with her usual authoritative tone, outlining the company's strategic goals for the upcoming quarter. But even as she spoke, Alex could tell something was wrong. Her voice, usually so precise and controlled, was laced with strain. Her gaze flickered across the room, but it kept returning to him, lingering just a second too long each time. And then, in the middle of a sentence, she stopped. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Zelina stood frozen, her eyes unfocused. The glow around her intensified, brightening to a level that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. The pheromone scent in the air thickened, becoming almost overpowering. Alex felt his chest tighten, his heart racing as he struggled to keep his mind clear. "Ma'am," one of the department heads asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. Zelina didn't respond. Instead, she seemed to take a sharp breath, her crystalline eyes narrowing as she tried to regain control. But it was too late. The glow around her skin flared, and the pheromone surged like a tidal wave. Alex felt it hit him like a physical force. His thoughts scattered, his body tensing involuntarily. All around him, he could hear the shuffling of chairs, the low murmurs of confusion as the other employees reacted to the sudden, overwhelming intensity of Zelina's presence. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving nothing but the heady, intoxicating scent of her pheromones. And then, everything exploded. The outburst, Zelina's voice cracked like a whip through the air, but it wasn't her usual calm, commanding tone. It was strained, raw. Enough. Her outburst stunned everyone into silence. Her glowing form pulsed erratically, and she took a step forward, her eyes blazing. I cannot control it any longer." The words were almost a snarl, alien in their cadence. Her usually emotionless face was now a mask of frustration and something else, something primal. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense to dangerous, and everyone could feel it. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The pheromones were hitting him like waves, crashing against his senses, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. His vision swam as Zelina's presence dominated the room, her power pushing everyone to the brink. The entire department was frozen, paralyzed by the intensity of her loss of control. Zelina's eyes darted around the room, wild and unfocused, before they locked onto Alex. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them standing in the center of a maelstrom of pheromones and tension. "Carter," she growled, her voice low and dangerous. "You are affected more than the others." "Why?" Alex had no answer. He was barely holding it together, his body reacting to her pheromones in ways he couldn't control. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His thoughts were jumbled, his senses overwhelmed. Zelina took another step toward him, her presence so overwhelming now that it felt like the very air between them was vibrating. The glow of her skin had become blinding, and Alex could feel the heat radiating from her. There was a wild, untamed energy in her that he had never seen before, something primal and ancient. "I am at my limit," she whispered, so quietly that only Alex could hear her. "This cannot continue." For a moment, Alex thought she was going to lose complete control, that she might lash out or do something far worse. But then, with a visible effort, she pulled herself back. Her glow dimmed ever so slightly, and she straightened, regaining some of her composure. "I am dismissing the meeting," she announced, her voice still tight but more controlled. "Return to your desks. This issue will be addressed." The employees wasted no time, filing out of the room quickly, eager to escape the suffocating pressure. Alex, however, couldn't move. His feet felt rooted to the ground as he watched Zelina, still glowing, her eyes still fixed on him. When the room had emptied, Zelina let out a long, slow breath, and the tension in her body seemed to ease just a little. "Carter," she said, her voice softer now, almost resigned. "Stay." Confrontation and resolution. The room was eerily silent as Alex stood before Zelina, the door to the conference room sliding shut behind the last of his co-workers. The air was still thick with pheromones, but now that they were alone, the intensity had shifted. It was no longer oppressive, it was personal. Zelina paced slowly, her movements controlled, but Alex could see the strain in her posture. She was fighting to maintain her composure, to keep the wild energy coursing through her body in check. "I underestimated the effect my pheromones would have on you," she said finally, her back to him. "On all of you. This phase of my biology is unpredictable. It is supposed to be manageable, but I have clearly failed." Alex swallowed, unsure of what to say. His mind was still reeling from the meeting, from the way Zelina had looked at him, the way her presence had overwhelmed him. But now, as she stood there, admitting her weakness, he felt something shift. You're not in control of it, are you?" he asked quietly. Zelina turned to face him, her crystalline eyes piercing his. "No," she admitted. "I am not. The pheromones are supposed to be subtle, controlled. But something about this phase, it is stronger than usual. Perhaps it is the environment. Perhaps it is." She trailed off, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at him. "Perhaps it is you." Alex blinked. "Me?" Zelina stepped closer, her gaze intense but not hostile. "I have noticed it for days now. The pheromones react more strongly when you are near. It is as though my biology is responding to something within you." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. "What does that mean?" Zelina studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I do not know. But I do know this, I cannot continue to allow this to affect the company. It is unacceptable." She took a deep breath, her glow dimming even further as she visibly forced herself to calm down. "There is a treatment. A suppressant that I have been avoiding, because it dampens more than just the pheromones. It weakens me. But if I do not take it, this situation will only worsen. Alex felt a strange pang of concern. Why haven't you taken it yet? Zelina hesitated, her gaze softening for the first time. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe I wanted to believe I could control it. But I see now that it is affecting everyone, especially you, and I cannot allow that. She stepped closer, standing just a few feet away from him now. The air between them seemed to hum with energy, but it was different from before. Calmer. More controlled. I will take the suppressant, Zelina said firmly. And this will end. Alex nodded, his heart still racing. He wasn't sure if it was from the pheromones or something else entirely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. Something unspoken but undeniable. Zelina held his gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You have handled this well, Carter. Better than most. I will not forget that. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving Alex standing alone in the conference room, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. As the door slid shut behind her, Alex let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension in the room slowly dissipated, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air felt lighter. The storm had passed. But as Alex made his way back to his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that the connection between him and Zelina, whatever it was, had only just begun.